Hello, I'm at David Levin 123. I'm using my Twitter handle rather than my human name because I'm obsessed with Twitter and how it has changed the world. Very aware that Twitter now has been renamed X, but I fell in love with it when it had its maiden name, so I'm going to keep referring to it as Twitter for tonight. So before I show you some examples of how I feel Twitter has changed humankind, I'm going to tell you a bit about how it changed my life. So I used to live across the road from a pub in East London. It was quite a sort of rowdy late night pub where they played hip hop and R&B till 5 in the morning, and people drank too many Jaeger bombs. And one night, lots of people were tweeting about the pub, and me and my flatmate then had a couple of glasses of wine and couldn't believe that the pub didn't have its own Twitter account. So I'd been a writer for quite a few years, and yeah, I thought I'd have a go at setting one up. Now, it was only really something that I just did for a bit of a joke, and I was just doing tweets about the type of music that they played in the pub, like I say, R&B and hip hop, and writing jokes and tweets about the drinks that everyone was drinking in there. And it got pretty popular, and I was sort of, at the time I was on Twitter myself, but this was the way that I've got into Twitter and learned about writing on Twitter. But it was this moment here during the Olympics that really sort of opened my eyes to how Twitter had changed the connection between people and the events that they are interested in had been really reduced by Twitter, and in a really exciting way. So I just wrote this joke about the athlete Katrina Johnson-Thompson and how she should marry Mark Ronson. And then the next day, after a rapper called Example retweeted it, she responded with this picture of her and Mark Ronson. I don't know if they went on to get married and have lots of babies, but it doesn't really matter. The point was, it showed me how easily with Twitter you could sort of have access, you could impact the things that you wanted to talk about. And then as the Twitter account got more popular, I started getting asked to tweet for other brands and for TV shows, and it became quite a strange point in my life where I was jumping from tweeting about Jaeger bombs to tweeting about tea bags and then pretending to be TV shows. And it was great because influencers and celebrities started tweeting about not only the shows, but also the Twitter account itself. Boy George said it's clearly a queen running a Twitter account for The Voice, so pleased to say here she is. But also, it was great that the people working on the shows, like Kylie, were shouting out the person who was sat at home doing tweets. And it was a strange time, I suppose. Back then, most TV shows and brands weren't really putting that much effort into the tone of voice on social, so it's sort of easier to stand out. But yeah, it was a time that was odd. I sort of got this strange type of fame, and it led to me accidentally becoming the UK's first professional tweeter, which is something that this newspaper article spoke about, which was great because then I sort of got a lot more clients doing that. And it led to me then setting up a social media agency with two other guys, and then ultimately led to me moving to Ireland. So yeah, Twitter completely changed my life. And as I mentioned before, I'm a writer and I'm obsessed with how Twitter has impacted writing and editorial. It's really put a high value on brevity, the importance of writing things that you can connect with people, but in as few words as possible. And this is RGA, they're an agency who said, just heard someone describe a single complete sentence as long copy. And it's true in the world that I move around in the creative industries, particularly with younger audiences. The attention span has changed in such a way that you really, really need to try and connect people with as few words as possible. Which is interesting. Some of you may have seen this before. This has gone on to be the most shared piece of brand content ever. So if you haven't seen this, I'll talk you through it. So this is when Kanye tweeted that McDonald's is his favourite restaurant, to which Burger King then quote tweet came back with explains a lot, just 3 words. But it was interesting because just these 3 shady words, nice little bit of copywriting, as I say, went on to be astronomically shared across the internet and got seen by an amount of people that would have cost millions and millions and millions of pounds to reach if you were doing it through advertising. And it was just an example of the power of short copywriting on Twitter. But what I also like is how some brilliant writers play around with the restriction on Twitter. So it used to be 140 characters, now it's 280, and they sort of turn that into interesting content. So this is, I think she's a comedian, she did this brilliant tweet that goes, "Ladies, what's your makeup routine? I'm looking for a new foundation, preferably liquid, but still matte, and now that the men have stopped reading, we riot at midnight." Which I just think is an ingenious use of the format, and it's an example of the type of brilliant, beautiful creativity that you see on my favourite social platform every day. It's also changed how we as people engage with brands and businesses and famous people, and it just, the connection is different now. It's much easier to have that connection. And there's been some really interesting examples of, because brands and businesses now are sort of forced really to engage with customers and potential customers in a way that they didn't used to before. It has really spawned some pretty interesting examples. This was during the when the Black Lives Matter movement first started, and a lot of brands were tweeting support of that, which made a lot of sense. But there were some people who weren't excited about that, like this person here, Laura, who said she was really chuffed that Yorkshire Tea, the tea bag brand, hadn't supported Black Lives Matter. To which Yorkshire Tea came back and said, "Please don't buy our tea again. We're taking some time to educate ourselves and plan proper action before we post. We stand against racism." And why I found this really interesting was A, I'd never seen a brand actively telling someone not to buy their product before, but B, it was that this kind of became their stance or their most sort of seen statement, I suppose, on Black Lives Matter. And it was an example of a brand sort of acknowledging that maybe they took a bit too long to get there, but they wanted to do it in the right way. But I thought it was a really interesting example of the sort of engagements that you see on Twitter. And this one, I have to apologise in advance for lowering the tone with the language here, but I just thought it was such a good example, I could not include it. This is someone, Greta Thunberg. If you don't follow her on Twitter, I would really recommend that you do. She responds to people in quite a surprising way, but she knows that it's because it gets her a huge amount of attention, which is a huge amount of attention for the cause that she is fighting so hard for. And this, I think, is the best example of it, where Andrew Tate decided to brag about how many cars he's got and how much fuel they guzzle, and generally being a bit of an arse. Can I say arse on a TED Talk? I just did. Let's keep going. But it's about to get a bit worse than that. But so he said, "Yeah, I've got 33 cars. But can I please provide your email address so I can send a complete list?" To which Greta came back, "Yes, please do enlighten me. Email me at smalldickenergy@getalife.com." Which, again, I apologise for the language, but I thought it was just a brilliant example of the power of engagement on Twitter. And if you look at the numbers, the amount of people that saw that was absolutely huge. And speaking of activism, Twitter has inspired new types of activism. It's really interesting now that, years ago, I don't think you would have imagined that an ice cream brand would become the people that would be sort of leading a conversation on the human rights of refugees. But actually, in this case, this is what they did a couple of years ago. They did this Twitter thread reaching out to Priti Patel, talking about the human rights violations and how things should be done differently. And again, it got a huge amount of interest, and I think there's been a democratization of of creativity or content that Twitter has done, in that if it's good or if it's interesting, people on Twitter don't mind whether you're an individual or a brand or a business. So interesting to see how an ice cream brand could just start being an activist in that way. And of course, Twitter has been responsible for some of the biggest movements of the past decade. The Me Too movement that started as this tweet obviously went on to be this huge thing that quite genuinely changed the world. And it was just an example of a great idea that can happen on Twitter and how that can move across into the real world. And of course, the Arab Spring is often talked about as being one of Twitter's kind of finest moments in some ways, seeing how the people there used Twitter as a sort of a way of connecting with each other and helping themselves through it. But also, when they were sort of being told they weren't allowed to use social media or digital media, Twitter kind of became an act of defiance. So it was a real interesting, powerful part in Twitter's evolution. And personally, I love how Twitter takes some of the sort of heavy stuff that happens in everyday life and it takes the edge off, you could say. This is just one of thousands of examples I could have shown you when someone the other day noticed that all of Donald Trump's legal team looked like Wayne Rooney. And again, it's just, I love the fact, I suppose it's just a joke, but it's done in such a Twittery way that I love. And I think the moment that this became turbocharged was lockdown, when we were all in the same situation, in this mad situation at home, and Twitter became somewhere that you could go and see people talking about that madness, but in a way that took the edge off, in a way that made it a bit lighter. And again, there were thousands of examples that I loved, but this is just one of them. This guy here, me getting escorted back from the corner shop after nipping out for a Twix and a can of Vimto, and again, just a brilliant way of taking some of the madness away from that hellscape we were all in. And this is another one, even in moments of history, in times of history, like when the new king came in, there's always people on Twitter finding moments of gold, finding relatable things that put a different kind of spin on those moments of history. And I love this one, the bottle of Britney's fantasy perfume. And of course, it's changed the way that our leaders speak to us. And I think really actually the president that kind of moved this along most was Obama. And he was always been brilliant at using social media in general, but really stood out on Twitter. And this, I thought, was just an interesting one. It was during an awful massacre, there was the riots over there that was spawning loads of sort of racist violence. And by responding with this quote, it was a way of commenting on what was going on without just having to sort of do it as a straight ahead speech. And I think it was more powerful doing it this way and just really managed to connect with people, I think, in a way that you wouldn't do outside of Twitter. I thought it was, and this actually at the time went on to be the most liked tweet of all time. There was something about the humanity of it that really touched people. But of course, love him or hate him, Donald Trump is someone who has embraced Twitter more than I think any leader before. I think it'd be hard to imagine a few years ago that a president would be tweeting something, would be saying something like, "Sorry, losers and haters, but my IQ is one of the highest and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault." And I think, without getting into any opinions on Donald Trump or presuming any of your opinions on it, I think from a Twitter perspective, it is really interesting how he has seen the value of being relatable and connecting with people. And it's interesting to see how astronomically successful he has been at doing that. But yeah, unfortunately, he's also a couple of times flirted with the... Don't worry. The idea is it's almost started wars from within inside tweets. I think I've lost it. Oh yes, this one here. So he This was when, you wouldn't have imagined before Twitter that we would have been privy to some of these conversations between the President of the United States and the Iranian President. This is when he was talking about never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which, etc., etc. But obviously this was a terrifying moment because it looked like he could be sparking actual war on the back of it. But again, really interesting to see how Twitter has provided this place where we can be watching some of these things play out. And this, every single day there are people using Twitter to reach out to other people, be it for help or for advice. There's lots of brilliant uses of Twitter in that way. This one I've just included today because I just think it's one of my favourite ever examples of people asking for help on Twitter. This was the festival Tea in the Park, who just was tweeting apologies for a short delay, and they were explaining why, to which someone responded, "Hi, I'm somewhere in Green 7. Someone's packed me into a tent bag for a joke, and I can't get out, and I don't have much battery left." And for me, I just found it fascinating that in this moment of what must have been real abject terror, he chose to turn to Twitter as the place to do that. And I think it did work, and I saw on the back of it that he thankfully got rescued from his tent. But just an example of how Twitter is a great place if you are needing to connect with people and needing help from people quickly. But really, I suppose my favourite thing about my favourite social platform is how it celebrates the everyday, the small moments of every day, and how it turns them into these little gems that we can sort of all connect with and all feel better about our lives. And that's examples like this, when someone's grandpa went to get passport photos done but accidentally pressed the wrong button. This is something I think a lot of us can relate to. Or this one here, when someone's mum got a bit confused by a picture of Ewan McGregor. Again, it's these everyday moments of life that get turned into gold. But I think I will leave you with this one, which hopefully for me, I think Twitter in many ways has been a sort of beacon of hope, and I really, really hope that it will continue to do that in its new existence as X. And that was just this picture here, a message from a local ticket machine: change is possible. So I would say thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.